Virgin stalked all night with the ruthless billionaire she hates so much. But after one night, everything changed. Part 2, she woke to light. Not the amber emergency kind. Real light. Fluorescent and sudden. Flooding the elevator with the specific harshness of electricity restored after absence. The panel lit up. The numbers blinked. And somewhere in the walls of the building, the machinery of the elevator shuddered back to life with a low, purposeful groan. Arya lifted her head. The warmth of Damien's shoulder left her in an instant, replaced by the cool, recycled air of a functioning elevator, and she was upright and smoothing her blouse before she'd fully assembled a thought. Her heart was doing something uneven. Her hair had loosened from its pin on one side. She fixed it with fingers that were steadier than she felt and stared at the panel like it was the most interesting thing in the room. The elevator began to move. "Power's back," Damien said. He was already standing. She didn't know when he'd risen, only that he had jacket back on, cuffs re-rolled, the careful reconstruction of his professional self assembled with a speed that might have been practiced. He looked composed. He looked like Damien Wolf again, the version she knew from boardrooms and building sites, and something about that, the speed of it, the ease, landed somewhere in her chest with a weight she hadn't anticipated. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of it. The floors ticked upward on the panel. She watched the numbers. Neither of them spoke. And the elevator stopped at 32, the first available floor, and the doors slid open onto a dim, empty corridor. Maintenance lighting. No one around at 3 in the morning. They stepped out. Arya stood in the corridor with her bag over her shoulder and her sketchbook under her arm and the full, sober weight of 3 a.m. settling around her, and she thought, this is where it ends. This is where the elevator becomes a story we don't tell, and things return to what they were. She turned to say goodnight. Damien was already looking at her. There were 17 floors between 32 and the lobby. The functioning elevator arrived in 40 seconds, and they wrote it down in a silence that was entirely different from the ones they'd shared above. Thinner, more exposed. It's the silence of two people aware that the container they'd been living in for the past 4 hours was about to disappear, and they hadn't agreed on what to do with its contents. The lobby was empty except for a night security guard who looked up briefly, registered nothing unusual about two people emerging from the elevator bank at 3 a.m., and returned to his phone. The revolving doors were ahead. Beyond them, New York, cold and indifferent and completely real. Arya stopped at the edge of the lobby. "I'll get you a car," Damien said. "I can manage." "Callahan." Not sharp, just certain. "It's 3 in the morning. She looked at him for a moment, then, "All right." He made a call. Brief, efficient, the version of him she recognized, and told her it would be 4 minutes. They stood near the doors side by side, not quite looking at each other. The lobby hummed with its overnight quiet. The city pressed against the glass. She was trying to find the seam, the place where she could fold the evening neatly and put it away and walk back into Monday morning as the person she'd been on Friday. Junior architect, careful, contained, professionally invisible to Damien Wolf in all the ways that mattered. She couldn't find it. "Arya," he said. She turned. He'd used her name, not Callahan, her name, the one that lived in her grandmother's voice, in Mara's texts, and nowhere professional, certainly never in his mouth before tonight. He looked like he'd surprised himself with it. She waited. "Tonight?" He stopped, started again, with the deliberate quality of someone choosing words with the care he usually reserved for contracts. "Kara, I don't do this." "Do what?" He gestured, a small, uncharacteristic motion, vague in a way that nothing about him usually was. "This." She understood what he meant. She understood it precisely. "I know," she said quietly. "Neither do I." The car appeared at the curb. Its headlights swept the lobby glass. She thought about it the entire ride home, not the shoulder, though she thought about that too, briefly, and then firmly redirected. She thought about what he'd said about structural engineering, about his brother, about 5 hours of sleep for 3 years, about the way his expression had done something complicated every time she'd said something he hadn't expected, like a man recalibrating a map he'd been using for years and finding it slightly, significantly wrong. She thought about, so do I. She thought about the way he'd said don't when she'd started to pull away. She pressed her forehead against the cool car window and watched the bridge cables slide past, Brooklyn growing closer, and told herself with great sincerity that she was a sensible person who made sensible decisions, and Monday morning would restore the natural order, and she would be fine. Gerald the plant watched her come in at 3:45 a.m. with the impassive judgment of something that had no stakes in her choices. She made tea she didn't drink and sat at her drafting table and didn't draw anything. Monday arrived with the reliable cruelty of Mondays. Aria wore her armor, a structured navy blazer over a white silk blouse, tailored black trousers, her hair up and precise, her bag packed and her face arranged. She took the subway instead of a cab, which was both cheaper and loud enough to prevent thinking. She arrived 7 minutes early and went directly to her desk. Mara was already there, which was unusual, and took one look at Aria and said, "What happened to you?" "Nothing," Aria said. Mara's eyes narrowed. "You have the face." "I don't have a face." "You have the face you get when something happened that you've already decided not to talk about." Mara leaned forward. "Ari, I got stuck in the elevator Friday night," Aria said, setting her bag down and opening her laptop with the focused energy of someone who had decided that productivity was the appropriate response to every emotional situation. "Power outage. I was here late. It was fine." A pause. "Stuck with who?" Mara said. Aria said nothing. Well, Mara said, "Aria Elena Callahan." "It was nothing." "You used your nothing voice. Your nothing voice is specifically for things that are something." Aria looked at her screen. "I have the Meridian revisions to finish." "Stuck with who?" "Good morning." The voice came from across the open floor. Low even, caring without effort. Aria felt it before she processed it. A specific awareness at the base of her spine, a shift in her attention that she hadn't authorized. She looked up. Damien was crossing the floor toward the executive corridor, the route that took him past the open plan area. He was in a dark charcoal suit, navy tie, looking exactly like himself. Composed, unreachable, every inch the man whose name was on the building. His eyes moved across the room. They stopped briefly on her. Nothing changed in his expression. But something she wouldn't have caught if she hadn't spent 4 hours learning the difference between his performed composure and the real thing, shifted. The smallest possible acknowledgement, a degree of warmth that no one else in the room would have registered. He continued walking. Mara turned to Aria with the slow precision of someone who had just gathered significant intelligence. "Oh," she said. "Don't," said Aria. She avoided the executive floor for 3 days. This required minor logistical creativity, rerouting her coffee run, taking the stairs, attending the Wednesday project meeting via the conference room on 28 rather than the one on 42 where she'd normally have gone. It was not, she told herself, avoidance. It was space. She was giving herself space to return to equilibrium, which was a completely reasonable and healthy thing to do. On Thursday morning, she found a note on her desk. Not a digital one, physical, on Wolf Development's letterhead, handwritten in a script that was precise and angular, and told her a great deal about a person. The waterfront proposal needs a second opinion on the structural integration. My office, 4 p.m., if you're available. DW. She read it 3 times. She told herself it was professional. It was absolutely professional. He needed a second opinion on a structural question, and she was a structural thinker. He'd seen that from the sketchbook, from the Meridian revisions. This was a work request, nothing more, and she was going to treat it as such. She went to Mara's desk. "He left me a note," she said. Mara looked up from her screen. "Darn, a physical note?" "On letterhead." Mara stared at her. "Damien Wolf wrote you a note by hand on company letterhead. About a project. On letterhead. It's professional. Aria." Mara set her pen down with the gravity of someone making a formal declaration. "In 4 years at this company, I have never once received a handwritten note from Damien Wolf. I have received exactly 1 email from him, and it contains 7 words and no punctuation." She paused. "That note is not professional." Aria looked at the note. She went at 4 o'clock. His office was on the 42nd floor, and it was exactly what
If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more amazing love stories. All right, back to the story.
she'd have designed for him without meaning to. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking lower Manhattan, the harbor visible in the far distance. Everything functional and precise with the single exception of a bookshelf along the east wall that was so thoroughly overloaded it had given up any pretense of organization. Books stacked horizontally across vertically shelved ones, papers tucked into gaps, a coffee cup being used as a bookmark. She looked at the bookshelf. "Don't," he said from behind his desk without looking up. "I didn't say anything." "You had a face." She looked away from the bookshelf. He was standing now, moving around the desk with a rolled architectural drawing, the waterfront proposal, she recognized the scale, and setting it out on the meeting table by the window. She joined him, and they stood side by side looking at it. And the professional distance she'd spent 4 days carefully reconstructing wobbled slightly at the proximity. And the proposal was impressive, also genuinely problematic in two specific places. She saw them immediately, the places where aesthetic ambition had outpaced structural consideration, where the design was asking the foundation to hold more than was reasonable. She leaned in, pointed. "Here and here." He looked, said nothing for a moment. Then, "I saw the second one, missed the first. The cantilever on the north face is carrying too much. If you want that profile, you need to revise the support structure below grade, which adds cost, which is worth it." She looked at him. "Unless you want a building that looks extraordinary for 15 years and then has opinions." Something moved through his expression. Not amusement exactly. Something quieter, more interior than that. "Has opinions," he repeated. "Airy buildings have opinions about their own design. Eventually they express them. Is that an architectural principle or a Callahan principle?" "Both." He looked at the drawing. She looked at the drawing. They stood close enough that she was aware of every inch of the distance between them, which was not a great number of inches, which was not something she was going to address. "Aria," he said. She looked up. He wasn't looking at the drawing. He was looking at her with an expression she'd last seen at 2 in the morning on the floor of a broken elevator. Open in a way that she suspected cost him more than it looked like. "Friday night," he said. "I've been thinking about it." Her heart did something inconvenient. "So have I." "And?" She held his gaze. She thought about Gerald the plant and her cold tea and the bridge cables and 3:45 in the morning and every sensible, careful, self-protective instinct she had cultivated for 26 years. Then she thought about don't, and I stopped letting myself think about it, and a man who understood why things stayed standing and had somewhere in the amber light decided, just for one night, to put down the weight. "I think," she said carefully, "that I don't know what to do with you." He was quiet. Then, "That makes two of us." "That's not particularly reassuring." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She looked at the drawing. He looked at the drawing. Outside the window, the harbor sat silver and enormous in the late afternoon light, the waterfront project's future site somewhere in its distance. "The cantilever needs redesigning," she said. "I know. It'll take time to do it right." "I know that too." She nodded, rolled the drawing carefully, set it aside, and then, because she was someone who understood that the most interesting structures were the ones that held both, the rigid and the soft, the planned and the unexpected, she let herself look at him one more time before she left, directly, unhurriedly, with all the quiet, careful, terrifying honesty of someone who has decided to stop standing behind the line. "Good night, Damien," she said, his name in her mouth for the first time. He looked at her like she'd moved something. "Good night, Aria," he said. She left his office. She took the elevator down, the regular one, the functioning one, and stood in it for 32 floors, with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, feeling her own heartbeat like it was new information. It was. In a way, it was. It started as most things that unravel do, with something small. A Tuesday, 3 weeks after the elevator, 3 weeks of waterfront proposals and late afternoon meetings that ran longer than their stated purpose, and conversations that moved, with increasing ease and increasing danger, between the professional and the personal. 3 weeks of Mara watching Arya with the quiet intensity of a scientist observing a reaction she'd predicted, but hadn't expected to find quite so interesting. 3 weeks of something building. Arya had stopped pretending she didn't know what it was. She hadn't named it out loud, hadn't handed it to Mara or written it anywhere, or said it in the privacy of her own apartment with only Gerald as witness. But she had, somewhere between the second waterfront meeting and a Thursday evening, where she and Damien had stayed talking until the cleaning crew arrived, and looked at them with polite bewilderment, stopped arguing with herself about it. She was falling, not quickly, not recklessly. In the way she did everything, carefully with full structural awareness, understanding exactly which load-bearing elements were involved and how much weight she was placing on each one. But she was falling, which was why Tuesday was so devastating. It began with a name she didn't recognize, Sophia Reeves. She heard it first from the assistant at the front desk, overheard, not eavesdropped, and while she was waiting for the elevator with a coffee she'd been meaning to drink for an hour. Two assistants, low voices, the specific energy of an office absorbing new information. Sophia Reeves, Wolf's ex, the one his father always wanted him to marry. She's in town, apparently. Reached out. Arya had gotten into the elevator and pressed the button for her floor and stood with her coffee going cold in her hand. She told herself it was nothing. People had histories. Damien Wolf had 34 years of life that had nothing to do with her, and an ex-girlfriend in that life was not information she had any claim to, any right to feel anything about. She felt something anyway. She filed it away and went back to work. She saw them at 4:30. She hadn't been looking. She'd been crossing the lobby on her way to a site visit, a bag over her shoulder, hard hat tucked under her arm, mind on the foundation specs she'd been reviewing. She turned the corner near the building's front entrance and stopped. Damien was near the doors. He was in his coat. The dark wool one she learned meant he was heading out. And beside him was a woman who occupied space with the easy confidence of someone who had always known exactly how to stand in a room. Tall, elegant, in a camel coat that looked like it had been designed specifically for her. Dark hair, a smile that knew something. She was touching his arm, not dramatically, just her hand on his forearm. Brief, familiar, the gesture of someone for whom that contact had history, had precedent, had a whole architecture of intimacy behind it. Damien was listening to her, when his expression was, Arya had spent 3 weeks learning to read his expression, had developed a working vocabulary of its variations. Complicated, not cold, not closed, something more troubled than either. He hadn't seen Arya. She turned around and took the stairs. She was fine. She was completely fine. She did the site visit. She reviewed the foundation specs. She answered 4 emails and drafted a response to a contractor query and ate half a sandwich at her desk at 7 p.m. because she'd forgotten about lunch again. She was fine. Mara called at 7:30. You didn't come back past my desk. I had a site visit. That ended at 6. Ari, I'm finishing up the specs. A pause. What happened? Nothing happened. I'm working. You're using your nothing voice again, and this time I'm not letting it go. A beat. Talk to me. Arya set down her pen. She looked at the specs. She looked at Gerald. She'd brought him to the office 2 weeks ago. An uncharacteristic impulse she told herself was about the good light near her desk window, which Mara had found hilarious and said nothing further about. I saw him with someone, she said, an ex. It wasn't anything. They were just standing in the lobby. Oh, Ari, it's fine. Nothing has even happened between us. There's nothing to be upset about. Okay, but you are upset. She stopped. I don't have the right to be. Feelings don't really care about rights, Mara said gently. Arya was quiet. Have you talked to him since you saw them? No? Are you going to? She looked at her specs. I'm going to finish these and go home. She pulled back. Not dramatically, where she wasn't a dramatic person, and she wasn't going to become one on behalf of a situation that was, by every technical measure, not a situation at all. There had been no declaration, no definition, no conversation that converted what was between them into something with a name and a set of terms. She had simply allowed herself to hope, had let the careful structure she kept around herself develop a door she hadn't finished building yet, and had been standing near it in a way that she now recognized as dangerous. She closed it. She stopped taking the long route past the 42nd floor. She kept her waterfront contributions to email, detailed, professional, thorough. She attended the Wednesday meeting in the conference room on 28. She arrived at work at the same time and left at the same time, and kept every interaction within the clean lines she'd drawn when she first started. She was good at this. She'd built this structure specifically. She knew where every beam was. Damien noticed on day 2. She knew because of the note, not a warm one this time. Nothing like the letterhead request that had made Mara stare. This one was a meeting agenda, standard, her name on it along with 5 others. The waterfront project review, Thursday at 3. She attended. She sat 2 seats away from him and spoke when spoken to, and offered her structural observations with the clean precision of someone who had nothing but professional investment in the room. She did not look at him longer than necessary. She did not look for the specific quality of his attention that she'd learned to recognize. She felt him watching her. She kept her eyes on the drawing. After the meeting, when the others had filed out, she was gathering her documents and she heard behind her. "Aria." She finished gathering her documents. Then she turned. He was standing by the window, the city behind him, and he looked. She didn't want to see it, but she saw it. Unsettled. Not in the ways he was unsettled in a boardroom when a deal wasn't moving right. Differently, more interior. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've had a heavy project load." "Aria." Quiet. Direct. "Don't." She held her documents against her chest. A small, physical barrier. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me what changed." She looked at him. She looked at this man who had handed her a protein bar in the dark and asked her to tell him something true and said her name like it meant something, and made her feel, for the first time in a long time, that being seen by someone was not the same as being exposed, and she thought about a camel coat and a hand on a forearm and the particular ease of old intimacy. "I saw you," she said, "last Tuesday, in the lobby, with someone." Something moved through his face. "Sophia." "You don't owe me an explanation." "She reached out," he said. "She was in the city. We spoke for 20 minutes in the lobby and she left." He paused. "That's the entirety of it." Aria was quiet. "Aria?" "I know that," she said. And she did. She believed him, without question, because she'd learned to read him and nothing in his face was hidden right now. "And I know it wasn't. I know." "Then what?" "It wasn't about her," she said. And here was the truth, the one she'd been pressing down since Tuesday. "It was about me, watching her touch your arm and realizing that She stopped, breathed. "That I'd let myself get somewhere I didn't decide to go. And it scared me." The room was very quiet. "I'm not good at this," she said, steady but only just. "I'm good at structures. I'm good at understanding why things hold. But this," she gestured, the same vague motion he'd made in the lobby 3 weeks ago, meaning this, whatever this is. "I don't know the load-bearing elements. I don't know what it can hold. And I don't—" Her voice dropped slightly. "I don't do well with things I can't calculate." Damien said nothing for a long moment. She waited, with everything she had, in it for him to close the distance. He didn't. He looked at her, and something in his expression did something painful. She watched it happen, watched him pull back from whatever edge he'd been near, watched the professional composure reassemble itself like a structure reinforcing under load. "I understand," he said. 2 words. Even. Careful. She nodded. "Good." She left the conference room. She took the elevator down. She walked to the subway and took the train to Brooklyn and let herself into her apartment and stood in her kitchen in her coat for 6 minutes without moving. Then she put the kettle on and sat at her drafting table and didn't draw anything. The days that followed were the specific kind of difficult that didn't announce itself. Not sharp, not dramatic, just a low, persistent ache like a building settling. She went to work, and she did excellent work. She received an email from Damien, professional, brief, complimentary of her latest structural notes on the waterfront proposal, and she replied in kind and closed her laptop and went to make coffee. Mara watched her with the careful sorrow of someone who understood the shape of what was happening and knew better than to press. The waterfront proposal moved forward. It was good work. She could see that even through the fog of everything else, could see that the revisions she and Damien had made to the cantilever and the foundation structure had produced something genuinely beautiful. A building that would hold. She found that specific irony almost funny. Almost. She was leaving late on a Wednesday, 12 days after the conference room, late enough that the floor was empty and the city outside had gone dark and reflective. When she passed the break room and heard a voice she recognized. Not Damien, his brother. She'd never met him, but she knew him immediately from the voice. The same low register, lighter, with a warmth that Damien's had when it was unguarded. He was on the phone, pacing, clearly waiting for someone, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway and smiled the easy smile of someone who had never needed to learn how. "Hey, sorry, one sec," he said into the phone. Then to her, "I'm waiting for my brother, Liam Wolfe." He extended a hand. "Arya Callahan," she said. "I work here." "Architect?" "Yes." Liam Wolfe had his brother's dark eyes, but none of the careful management behind them. He looked at her with open, uncomplicated interest. Not romantic, just genuinely curious in the way of someone who found people interesting as a default setting. "You're Arya," he said, with a quality she didn't know how to read. Yes. He mentioned you," Liam said, simply and completely, like this was unremarkable information. Then his phone buzzed and he looked at it and said, "Excuse me," and stepped into the corridor. Arya stood in the break room. "He mentioned you." She pressed her palm flat against the counter. She thought about the conference room, about I understand, about the 12 days of professional emails and appropriate distance, and a man who she knew, was not indifferent, who was pulling back for reasons that were not about Sophia Reeves or a lobby or anything external, but about something internal, something that looked, for one from the outside, very much like fear, the same fear she had, wearing different clothes. She picked up her bag. She took the elevator down. She walked out into the New York night, cold and clear and enormous, and stood on the sidewalk outside Wolf Tower and looked up at the 42nd floor where the lights were still on. She thought about structures, about the buildings she loved most, the ones that held both the rigid and the soft, the ones that were harder to build but lasted longer, about how the most common reason a structure failed wasn't poor design, it was incomplete commitment. You couldn't build something halfway. You couldn't put your materials in place and then refuse to complete the load path. Leave the structure open to the elements and call it caution. That wasn't caution. That was just a building waiting to fall. Well, she stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. Then she went home. She had some thinking to do. She drew all night. Not project drawings, not specs or elevations or anything with a practical application. She drew the way she used to before architecture became a career, before precision became a requirement. Back when she was 7 years old in her grandmother's brownstone, trying to understand why a room could feel something. She drew buildings that didn't exist, spaces that held contradictions, a structure with a rigid spine and open, breathing walls, a tower that was all glass on one side and solid on the other, defended and exposed, both at once, neither apologizing for the other. She drew until 4 a.m. and then sat back and looked at what she'd made and understood. And with the clean clarity of something that had been true for a while and was only now willing to be seen, that she wasn't drawing buildings. She was drawing him. The rigid and the soft, the defended and the exposed, the man who read every spec that came through his firm and never told anyone, who hadn't slept properly in 3 years, who knew why things stayed standing and had, in an amber-lit elevator, decided to put down the weight for one night. She was in love with Damien Wolfe. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote, in the margin of the drawing, in her small, precise script, "Incomplete commitment is just a building waiting to fall." She went to bed at 4:15. She slept 3 hours and woke up with the particular clarity of someone who has moved from confusion into decision, which is its own kind of rest. Mara knew before Arya said anything. She looked up from her desk when Arya came in, earlier than usual, something resolute in her step, and said, "Oh, you figured something out? I need to talk to him." "Yes," Mara agreed, with the serenity of someone who had been waiting 11 days for the sentence. "I don't know what I'm going to say." "Yes, you do." Arya set her bag down. "It might not change anything. He might—" She stopped. "He pulled back for a reason, Mara. There's something he's working with that I don't fully understand yet. So find out what it is. That requires him to tell me. Then give him a reason to." Mara looked at her steadily. "Ari, you've spent your whole life building structures that can hold contradictions. Hold this one." Arya looked at her for a moment. "Hey, and when did you get wise?" she said. "I've always been wise. You just don't come to me with the real things very often." Mara returned to her screen with the brisk efficiency of someone closing a topic they've handled correctly. "Go find him." He wasn't in his office. His assistant, a composed, efficient woman named Sandra, who had over the past few weeks begun greeting Arya with the slightly warmer acknowledgement reserved for people who appear repeatedly and for good reasons, told her Damien was at the waterfront site. Early walkthrough. He'd been going more frequently lately. Arya thanked her. She took the subway to the waterfront. The site was in its early stages. Cleared ground, foundation work beginning, the bones of something that would eventually be extraordinary rising from the edge of the harbor. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of New York winter clarity that made everything look like it had been cut from glass. The harbor stretched out silver and enormous, the city rising behind it. She spotted him from 50 meters away. He was standing at the edge of the site, hard hat on, dark coat, looking out at the water with his hands in his pockets. Alone. The construction crew was on the far end of the site, their sounds carrying on the clear air. He hadn't heard her approach. She stopped a few feet behind him. For a moment she just looked at him, at the set of his shoulders, still carrying that particular tension she'd first noticed in the elevator. The weight of someone who had been holding too much for too long. At the way he stood at the water's edge like a man who had come here not entirely for the site walkthrough. She thought about structural engineering, about wanting to understand why things hold, about a man who had been given a life he hadn't chosen and had carried it with both hands and somewhere along the way had stopped letting himself want anything that wasn't already decided. She thought about I stopped letting myself think about it. She understood that. She understood it in her bones. And she had understood since the sidewalk outside Wolf Tower, since 4 a.m. and the drawing and the margin note, that the answer to that kind of closing down was not more caution. It was someone willing to stay in the room. She stepped forward. "The foundation's going in well," she said. He turned. She watched his face move through something. Surprise, then something more complicated, then a stillness that wasn't quite composure. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the conference room, but without the professional layer, without the managed distance. Because there was no office here, no meeting table, nothing between them but the cold harbor air and the truth of why she'd come. "Arya," he said. "I know I said I didn't know what to do with you," she said. She had decided on the subway that she wasn't going to ease into this, wasn't going to manage it from a distance or let precision substitute for honesty. "I meant it when I said it, but I've been thinking." He was very still. "You pulled back," she said, "after the conference room, and I've been trying to understand it, and I think—" She paused. "I think it's the same thing I do. I think you're standing behind the line because it feels safer than what's on the other side of it. And I understand that. Hey, I built the same line." She held his gaze. "But I've been thinking about what you said, about structural engineering, about wanting to understand why things hold." She took a breath. "The reason things hold, Damien, isn't that they're built to withstand everything alone. It's that they're built in relationship, load paths, distribution of weight. Nothing holds in isolation. He said nothing, but his expression was doing something she'd last seen on an elevator floor at 2 in the morning, open, unmanaged, stripped of the careful construction around it. She continued, I'm not asking you to have everything figured out. I'm not asking for certainty. I know how to work with uncertainty. I do it in every design. What I'm asking is, she stopped, held the moment. Don't pull back because it's safer. Because I'm telling you right now, here from the other side of it, the safety isn't worth what it costs. The harbor moved behind him. The construction sounds continued on the far end of the site. A wind came off the water and she felt it against her face, cold and clean and real. Damien looked at her for a long time. Then he said, My father told me when I was 22 that the wolf name was not compatible with uncertainty. He said it quietly, not bitterly. The way you speak about something old, something that had shaped you before you were old enough to choose. He meant it about business, but I took it everywhere. He paused. It's a hard thing to put down. I know, she said, but you put it down once, in an elevator, for one night. She held his gaze, and nothing fell. Something moved through him, yet she saw it, the specific internal shift of a person rearranging something structural. I've been thinking about you every day, he said, since the elevator, since before the elevator, he stopped. I noticed your work before I knew your name. That's not something I've said out loud before. She absorbed this carefully. You could have told me. I know. He looked at the water briefly. I'm better with buildings than I am with this. I know that too. She felt the corner of her mouth move. I'm not asking you to be better. I'm just asking you to try. He looked at her. The morning light was doing something to his face, softening it, or perhaps he was doing that himself. She couldn't tell where the light ended and the choice began. I don't have a template for this, he said. Neither do I. That doesn't worry you. Terrifies me, she said honestly. I'm here anyway. Liam Wolf found out the same day because Liam Wolf had apparently been on a self-appointed mission since the moment he'd said he mentioned you to Arya in the break room and seen her face do something telling. He called Damien at noon. Damien, who was still at the waterfront site, who had not, after Arya left, immediately gone back to his walkthrough, but had stood at the water's edge for a while, doing something that looked a great deal like reconsidering the architecture of his entire interior life, answered on the second ring. I spoke to your architect, Liam said, without preamble. She's not my architect. She's going to be. With the absolute confidence of a younger brother who was right about everything and knew it. Actually, you look at her the way Dad used to look at Mum before he convinced himself he was too busy for it. Damien said nothing. He regretted that, Liam said, every day of his life after she was gone. You know he did. Liam, I'm not lecturing, I'm reminding. A pause. You've been managing everything for so long, you've forgotten that some things aren't supposed to be managed. They're supposed to be felt. Another pause. She came to the site, didn't she? Damien looked at the harbor. Yes. And I'm standing here talking to you instead of doing what I should have done 15 minutes ago. Liam was quiet for a moment. Then, so go do it. Damien was already moving. She was at the site entrance, waiting for a cab back to the office, when she heard him. Arya. She turned. He was crossing the site toward her, a hard hat in his hand now. Coat open despite the cold, with the particular energy of a man who had made a decision and was in the process of executing it before his own caution could catch up with him. She stood still. He stopped in front of her. Close. Closer than professional distance. Close enough that she could see the specific quality of his expression, which was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. More than the elevator, more than the conference room, more than any of it, because this was chosen, deliberate, a man deciding to put down the weight and stay down. I should have said this in the conference room, he said. I should have said it before you had to come here and say what you said. I know that. He held her gaze with a directness that cost him something. She could see it, the effort of staying open, out of not retreating into management. I don't know how to do this carefully. I've been trying to figure out a careful version of it for 3 weeks, and there isn't one. I know, she said softly. He stopped. Tried again. You're the first person in a very long time who has made me want to be in a room. Not because I need to be, not because there's an outcome to manage, just, he paused, because you're in it. The harbor wind moved between them. Damien, let me finish. His voice was low. I pulled back because I was afraid. Not of you, of what happens when I want something I can't control the outcome of. I've been afraid of that my entire adult life. He held her gaze. But you're right. The safety isn't worth it. She felt her eyes sting briefly. She blinked it back. I'm not built for halfway, he said quietly. I should have told you that from the start. If I'm in something, I'm in it. And that terrifies me more than any deal I've ever done. A beat. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. The morning light sat around them, silver and cold and generous. She looked at this man, rigid and soft, defended and open, learning in real time how to put down what his father had given him and pick up something that was actually his, and felt something in her chest settle. Not the anxious, careful settling of someone managing a situation, the deep, structural settling of something finding its correct load path. Okay, she said. He blinked. Okay? I said I wasn't asking for certainty. I meant it. She held his gaze. Okay, Damien, let's be terrified together. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, or quietly, the way the most significant structural changes happen. Not in collapse, but in a slow, inevitable, relieved release of tension. He reached out and took her hand. Neither of them moved for a moment, just stood at the edge of the waterfront site, the harbor enormous behind them, the city rising all around, his hand warm and certain around hers, the cold morning air doing nothing at all to the warmth between them. I have a 7 a.m. board call tomorrow, he said. I know, I have the Meridian final submission. And the Waterfront Foundation review Thursday. I'll have notes. Of course you will. And there it was. The almost smile from the elevator, completed this time, fully realized, warm and quiet and absolutely transformative on his face. Have dinner with me tonight. She looked at him. A real one, he said. Not a meeting. Not a proposal review. The almost smile deepened. Dinner. You and me. Tonight. She thought about Gerald, about cold tea and 4 a.m., drawings and a margin note about incomplete commitment. Yes, she said. The restaurant was on the Lower East Side. Not the kind of place she'd have expected from him. No white tablecloths, no sommelier. No, the reservation requires 6 weeks' notice formality. It was small and warm and lit with the kind of low golden light that made everyone look like the best version of themselves. Exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a menu written on a chalkboard that changed depending on what the kitchen felt like doing. She stood outside it at 7:58 p.m. and looked at the sign and felt something loosen in her chest. He was already inside. She could see him through the window, seated at a corner table, no jacket, dark sweater, looking at the chalkboard menu with the focused attention he gave everything, except softer. Less armored, the version of him she'd been quietly cataloging since an amber-lit elevator 3 weeks ago. The one that existed when he wasn't performing Damien Wolf for an audience. She pushed the door open. He looked up. He stood when she came in, not performatively, just rose naturally, the way a person does when someone they've been waiting for arrives. She crossed the restaurant toward him, and he looked at her the way he had at the waterfront that morning, with that open, unmanaged quality that she was still getting used to, that she suspected she would be getting used to for a very long time, and didn't mind at all. Ed, you wore your hair down, he said. Don't make it significant, she said, sitting across from him. Too late, he said, and picked up his menu. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling and failed completely. Dinner was easy. That was the word she kept returning to later. Not exciting in the electric, high-stakes way of everything that had preceded it. Easy in the way of something that has found its correct configuration and stopped straining. They talked about the waterfront. They talked about her grandmother's brownstone, and he asked questions that told her he'd been thinking about it since she'd first mentioned it in the elevator. They talked about Liam, who Damien described with the exasperated, devoted specificity of someone who had been annoyed by a person his entire life and would not survive without them. He told me to stop standing at the water and go after you, Damien said, somewhere around the second course. Smart man. Don't tell him that. He's already impossible. She laughed. A real one. Unguarded, unheld, the kind that arrived before she could make a decision about it. She watched him watch her laugh with an expression that was so undefended, it was almost difficult to look at directly. What? She said. Nothing. He looked down at his plate briefly. You don't do that in the office. Laugh? Like that? He looked up. Like it doesn't matter who sees. She held his gaze. I'm working on it. Don't work too hard, he said quietly. He stopped. It's what? He looked at her with the directness she'd come to understand was his most honest register. It's the best thing I've seen in a long time. The restaurant continued around them. Low voices, the sounds of a kitchen, the warm hum of a room full of people having their own evenings. She sat in the middle of all of it and felt for the first time in longer than she could precisely calculate, entirely present, not managing the moment from a slight distance, not monitoring her own reactions. Just here, at a corner table in a small warm restaurant with a man who had handed her a protein bar in the dark and asked to know something true and had, on a cold waterfront this morning, decided to stop being safe. She reached across the table. Her hand rested over his. Light, deliberate. He looked at it, then at her. I've been thinking about something, she said. Hannah, tell me. In the elevator, when you said you noticed my work before you knew my name. She held his gaze. What did you notice? He was quiet for a moment, not evasively, thoughtfully, the way he was quiet when he was selecting a truth rather than a deflection. Your Meridian submission, he said, 8 months ago, before Thorpe flagged it. I saw it in the project pile. I read it because the preliminary sketch on the cover page was, he paused, different. The way you'd solved the facade tension. Nobody else on the team had seen it that way. You read it 8 months ago. Yes. And you never said anything. No. A pause. I didn't know what to say. I'm not. He looked at her steadily. I told you, I'm better with buildings than with this. You're doing fine, she said. I'm doing terribly, he said. It's taking enormous effort. She laughed again, the real kind, and felt his hand turn under hers, his fingers closing around her hand, warm and unhurried, like something that had decided to stop being careful. They closed the restaurant, not intentionally. They simply kept talking, and the tables around them emptied one by one, and the kitchen sounds wound down, and eventually a very patient server came to tell them, with genuine kindness, that it was 11 p.m. They looked up with the mutual bewilderment of people who had lost track of time completely and found they didn't mind. Outside, the Lower East Side was doing its late-night things. The city compact and alive around them, the cold sharp and clean. Damien held the door, and she came through it, and they stood on the sidewalk in the January night with no particular plan, out in which was, she reflected, a first for both of them. Walk? He said. Yes, she said. They walked along the waterfront, not the development site, further north where the pedestrian path ran along the river, the water dark and moving beside them, the lights of Brooklyn across the water and the bridge cables glowing against the sky. She had her coat on and her hands in her pockets, and he was beside her, close enough that their arms touched occasionally as they walked. Neither of them adjusting the distance. She thought about a 7-year-old in a Harlem brownstone asking why a room could feel something. She thought about the answer she'd spent 19 years turning into a career, that the feeling of a space comes from its structure, from the deliberate relationship between what it holds and what it lets through. She between the solid and the open, the planned and the breathable. She thought about that, and she thought about the man walking beside her, and she thought, oh, that's what I've been building toward. Not a room, a life that could hold both, that didn't force a choice between the careful and the open, the structured and the felt. A life with a door in it, not the unfinished kind, the kind she'd been standing behind, but a real one, hinged and functional, that could open and close and open again. What are you thinking? Damien asked. Architecture, she said. Of course you are. A pause. Tell me. So she told him. about the 7-year-old in the brownstone and the kitchen that felt happier than the living room, about the answer she'd been building toward without knowing it, about structure as relationship rather than defense. And he listened, really listened, with the quality of attention she had learned to recognize as his most genuine. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. My mother loved buildings, he said. She used to take Liam and me around the city on Sundays, just walking. She'd stop in front of something and tell us what she felt from it. Not what it was, not who built it, what she felt. He paused. My father thought it was impractical. I thought it was the most interesting thing I'd ever heard. She looked at him. What happened to her? She died when I was 19, he said. Simply, without the managed flatness she'd heard him apply to difficult subjects in professional settings. Just the plain old weight of it. Before I inherited the firm, before all of it, he paused. Sometimes I think, if she'd been here, if she'd been there when my father was handing me the company and the expectations and the template for what a wolf was supposed to be, he looked at the water. She'd have said something that changed the shape of it. Arya was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you think she'd have said? He considered. Probably something about windows, he said, and light, and why some rooms feel happier than others. She felt the back of her throat tighten. She sounds like she would have been someone worth knowing. Yes, he looked at her. She would have liked you, immediately and without reservation. She held that, let it settle somewhere deep. Tell me more about her, she said, and he did. They walked for an hour. At some point, she'd taken her hands from her pockets, and one of them had ended up in his, natural and unremarked. Neither of them acknowledging the transition because it didn't need acknowledgement. It was simply where it had arrived. She talked, he talked. They talked in the easy building way of people who have discovered that conversation between them has no natural floor, that there is always, somehow, more. She told him about Bree, her loud, loving sister who called every Sunday and had been asking about her love life with increasing specificity since Christmas. He told her about the structural engineering textbooks he still kept. Not on the chaotic office bookshelf, but at home, on a specific shelf he'd never described to anyone. She told him about Gerald. He was quiet for a moment and then said with complete seriousness that he thought naming a plant showed strong character. She looked at him. You're not serious. I'm entirely serious. Hadi, it suggests you take long-term commitment seriously in all its forms. It's a plant. He's Gerald. She laughed so hard she had to stop walking. He stood beside her with the quietly delighted expression of a man discovering that making this particular person laugh was something he intended to pursue with the same focused dedication he brought to everything that mattered to him. When she recovered, she looked at him and shook her head. You're different, she said, outside the office. So are you. I know. She looked at the water. I think I forgot that for a while. That I could be. He looked at her with an expression she was going to need a new vocabulary for. Don't forget again, he said quietly. She met his eyes. I'll need reminding sometimes. I can do that, he said. He walked her to the bridge. He not across it, to the entrance, where the path curved and the city opened up behind them, and Brooklyn glowed across the water. They stood at the railing, the river moving below, and the night was cold and clear and full of the low ambient hum of New York being itself. She thought, I will remember this, exactly this. The light, the cold, the sound of the water. The man beside her who had handed her a protein bar in the dark and changed the shape of everything. Arya, he said. She turned. He was facing her. Close. The closest they'd been since the waterfront that morning, since his hand had closed around hers on the construction site. His expression held everything she'd cataloged over the past weeks and everything she hadn't had words for yet. The warmth beneath the composure, the open thing beneath the managed thing. The man who wanted to understand why things held and had, she now understood, been looking for something to hold on to himself. I know this is... He stopped. Started again with the careful deliberateness she'd come to love. I know I'm not easy. I know I have... Another pause. Years of habits that are going to take time to put down. I know that. I know that too, she said softly. I'm telling you in advance, he said, so you know I'm aware of it. So you know I'm not asking you to accept something I think is acceptable. I'm asking you to be patient with someone who is. He looked at her steadily, trying, genuinely, for the first time in a long time. She looked at this man, at the rigid and the soft, the defended and the open, the 34-year-old who had carried his father's name like a load-bearing wall and was learning, us slowly and deliberately, to redistribute the weight. Damien, she said, yes, I'm not looking for easy. She held his gaze with everything she had. I'm looking for real. Something in his face completed itself. He reached up, slow, unhurried, giving her every opportunity to understand what was happening. And his hand found her face, warm against her cold cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that was so at odds with every public version of him that it felt like a secret, like something that existed only here, only in this register, only between them. She leaned into it. Aria, he said quietly, like her name was a thing he'd been waiting to say correctly. Yes, she said, not to a question, just yes, to all of it. He kissed her. Not dramatically, not with the cinematic urgency of a grand gesture, softly with the same quality as everything real between them, the same patient, building, deliberate warmth of a man who did nothing halfway once he decided to do it at all. She felt his hand against her face, and the cold air around them, and the river moving below, and the city doing its indifferent, glorious thing in every direction. And she kissed him back with everything she'd been holding, since an elevator and a protein bar, and tell me something true. When they separated, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, then she opened them. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on another person's face. She didn't have a name for it. She suspected she would spend a very long time learning it. Hi, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the almost smile, fully realized, warm, quiet, completely transformative. Und hi. She got home at 1 a.m. Gerald was on the windowsill, thriving, indifferent to the hour and the expression on her face, which she suspected told a complete story to anyone who knew how to read it. She sat at her drafting table. She opened her sketchbook to a new page, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't draw a building. She drew a door, open, hinged, functional and real, the light coming through it from the other side, warm and specific and already familiar. Beneath it, in her small, precise script, she wrote, "Some structures are worth building twice, once to understand them, once to live in them." She closed the sketchbook. She made her tea. She drank it this time, warm and unhurried, while the city pressed its familiar glow against her windows, and Gerald continued his campaign of aggressive thriving on the sill. Her phone lit up on the table, a message, brief. In the economy of language she had come to know was his most sincere register. I should have said something 8 months ago. I'm saying it now instead. Good night, Aria. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed back, Good night, Damien. The cantilever thanks you for your patience. 3 seconds. Gerald is a lucky plant. She pressed her lips together. She set her phone down. She sat in her small Brooklyn apartment at 1 in the morning with her tea and her sketchbook and the specific, structural, load-bearing warmth of someone who had decided to stop building walls and start building doors. Outside, New York continued. The bridge cables glowed. The river moved. The city that didn't know and didn't care about any of it kept turning, indifferent and magnificent. Inside, Aria Callahan was exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 months later, the waterfront development broke ground officially. The coverage was significant. The project had attracted industry attention, and the structural innovation in the foundation design had been specifically cited in 2 architectural journals. At the press event, Damien stood at the podium and spoke with the focused authority she knew well, the version of him the city saw. She stood at the edge of the crowd with Mara, who had been insufferable about being right since approximately the first week of February and showed no signs of stopping. The foundation redesign, Mara said, reading from her phone. is credited to the collaborative work of Wolf Development's structural team, with particular recognition for junior architect Arya Callahan, whose cantilever solution. She looked up. Junior architect. He'd better fix that title. He already did, Arya said. Last month. Mara stared at her. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. From the podium, Damien's eyes moved across the crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who had given many public addresses and found her. Something in his expression shifted, small, invisible to everyone else in the crowd, visible to her completely. She nodded once. He returned to his address. Mara made a sound beside her that contained an entire opinion. Don't, said Arya. Otto, I'm not saying anything. You're making a face. It's a supportive face. It's an insufferable face. Those are the same face, Mara said serenely, when I'm right. Afterward, when the crowd had thinned and the journalists had moved on and the construction crew had begun the first ceremonial groundwork, Damien found her at the water's edge, the same spot, the harbor silver behind them, the city rising, the cold air carrying the smell of the river. He stood beside her, not performing anything, just there. Good speech, as she said. You didn't hear most of it. I heard the important part. He looked at her. Which part was that? She tilted her head up toward him. The part where you mentioned that the best structures are designed in collaboration, that nothing extraordinary is built alone. He held her gaze. Heike, I meant it. I know. She turned back to the harbor. Liam cried. He did not. He was absolutely about to. He had something in his eye. Both eyes? The almost smile, which was 6 months in, simply a smile now, fully inhabited, completely his. He took her hand at the water's edge the same way he had on a construction site on a cold January morning, certain and unhurried, like something that had always known where it belonged. The building's going to be beautiful, she said. Yes, he said, looking at her. It is. She looked at him. He looked back. The harbor moved. The city rose around them. The ground beneath them was the foundation of something that hadn't existed yet and would, when it was finished, be extraordinary. Not because it was perfect, because it was built right, with patience, with honest structure, with full commitment to the load path, with both the rigid and the soft, the planned and the breathable, the defended and the open, with everything it needed to hold, and hold it did. Dearest viewers, if you've ever held yourself back from something real because safe felt easier, this one's for you. Tell me in the comments, what made you finally decide to build the door? The end.